When 16-year-old Mariah confronted a cruel remark about her complexion in the bustling cafeteria of Ridgeway High, she didn't just silence her critic. She lit the spark for a conversation the school didn't know it needed. Lunch at Ridgeway High was an orchestra of chatter and movement. The cafeteria teemed with distinct clusters. The basketball crew dominating one table, the drama kids rehearsing lines at another, and the rest scattered in their usual groups. Amid the noise, Mariah sat at her favorite corner table by the windows, where the sunlight danced on her neatly styled twists. This spot was her refuge, a quiet space to savor moments of calm without feeling entirely removed. Mariah had long understood the unspoken rules of standing out. As one of the few black students in a mostly white school, her confidence often drew the wrong kind of attention. Her jokes were misinterpreted as brash, her vibrant laugh deemed too loud. Yet, she carried herself with poise, her warm brown eyes scanning the busy room as she opened her lunch, a steaming container of her grandmother's famous red beans and rice. Across the cafeteria, bursts of laughter drew her attention. A group of students, Liam, Kendra, and their entourage, huddled close, their voices rising above the din. Mariah noticed the way their glances darted in her direction, followed by mocking giggles. She pretended not to notice, focusing on the courtyard view beyond the window. But the laughter grew sharper, slicing through her focus like a blade. Liam's voice rang out, dripping with mockery. Bet she thinks that glow up is working, but she's still too dark to pull it off. The words hit Mariah like a slap, though she kept her expression neutral. Her fork hovered midair as she processed the insult. Years of dealing with microaggressions had taught her the art of masking pain, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just a whisper in passing. It was deliberate, calculated, and loud enough for half the room to hear. The chatter around her began to wane as heads turned toward the commotion. Kendra's weak chuckle punctuated the tension, but even she seemed uneasy. Liam, however, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin, clearly reveling in the attention. Mariah's heart pounded, her mind racing with options. She could let it slide, like so many times before, or she could stand and confront him. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Your silence is your strength, but your words are your power. Slowly, she set her fork down and rose to her feet, her chair scraping against the tiles. Is there a problem, Liam? Mariah's voice was steady, but it carried a weight that silenced the cafeteria. Conversations halted as every eye in the room fixed on her. Liam smirked, feigning innocence. What? Just speaking the truth. Mariah took a step forward, her calm demeanor belying the storm brewing within. Truth? You think your cheap insults make you brave? All they do is show how small you really are. A murmur rippled through the cafeteria, the tension thick enough to cut. Liam's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly, trying to dismiss her with a shrug. Relax, it's just a joke. A joke! Mariah's voice sharpened, slicing through the feigned indifference. Funny, I don't see anyone laughing. Except you. And maybe her? She glanced at Kendra, whose smile vanished under the weight of Mariah's gaze. The cafeteria was a powder keg, and Mariah was lighting the match. She stepped closer to Liam's table, her voice rising just enough to command the room. You can laugh at my skin, my culture, my existence all you want, but it says more about you than it ever will about me. Do you know what my skin represents? Strength, history, beauty. And no matter how many jokes you throw, that's not changing. Liam shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling. Kendra avoided eye contact, fiddling with her phone, while their friends exchanged uneasy glances. Mariah's words poured out, each one hitting its mark. You think your words can shrink me? You think your opinion defines me? Let me be clear. I don't need your approval, and I sure don't need your pity. What I do need is for people like you to stop acting like your ignorance is harmless. The silence was deafening. Even the lunch monitors, usually oblivious to the drama, stood frozen in place, their gazes fixed on the unfolding scene. A slow ripple of applause broke the quiet, starting with a single clap from the back of the room and spreading like wildfire. Mariah didn't wait for Liam's response. She turned on her heel and returned to her table, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. A few classmates approached her, offering quiet words of support. One whispered, "You said what we've all been thinking." By the next day, the confrontation was all anyone could talk about. In classrooms and hallways, Mariah's words were repeated, dissected, and admired. "Did you see how she shut him down?" one student marveled. Teachers began weaving discussions about respect and inclusion into their lessons, using the incident as a springboard. Meanwhile, Liam's circle dissolved into awkward silence. Kendra approached Mariah a few days later, her voice wavering as she stammered an apology. "I should have said something," she admitted. "You didn't deserve that." Mariah accepted the apology with grace, though her focus wasn't on Liam or Kendra. It was on the quiet students who had nodded along, the ones who had stayed silent before. Maybe now they wouldn't. Weeks later, the cafeteria buzz returned to its usual chaos. Mariah sat in her sunlit corner, a sense of calm washing over her. Taylor, her best friend, joined her, a grin lighting up her face. "You know, you're kind of a legend now." Mariah chuckled. "I just said what needed to be said." Taylor nodded. "And sometimes, that's all it takes." Mariah smiled, her gaze drifting back to the courtyard. She didn't need applause or validation. She had reclaimed her voice, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Mariah's words continued to ripple through the hallways of Ridgeway High. Conversations that had once been whispered behind closed doors were now being held openly in classrooms, lunch tables, and even among teachers. The school had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that solved every problem overnight, but in small, meaningful steps. People were thinking differently, listening more carefully, and for the first time in a long time, Mariah felt like her voice had been truly heard. Mariah herself remained a quiet force. She didn't bask in the newfound attention or revel in the hushed respect she received from her classmates. Instead, she focused on her studies, her friends, and the things that made her happiest: writing poetry, listening to her grandmother's stories, and watching the seasons shift outside her favorite cafeteria window. The incident with Liam wasn't the sum of her identity, and she refused to let it define her. But she did notice the changes. Liam, once the loudest voice in the cafeteria, had retreated into the background. He no longer held court with his friends, and his once confident smirk had been replaced with an air of discomfort. While he never apologized, his absence from the spotlight was apology enough for Mariah. She didn't need his words. She needed his silence, and now she had it. The most surprising changes, however, came from the students around her. During a group project in history class, a quiet girl named Emma, who had never spoken to Mariah before, leaned over and whispered, "I've always admired how brave you are. I wish I could be like that." Mariah smiled warmly. "You are brave, Emma. You just have to find the right moment to show it." It wasn't just Emma. More students began approaching Mariah, not just to commend her bravery, but to share their own stories. Stories of feeling overlooked, of standing out in ways they hadn't chosen, of wanting to belong but fearing the cost of doing so. Mariah listened to them all, her heart swelling with the realization that her words had opened a door not just for herself, but for others too. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow over the courtyard, Mariah sat with Taylor under the sprawling oak tree near the school's edge. The laughter of students echoed around them, blending with the rustle of leaves in the wind. "You think things will stay like this?" Taylor asked, pulling her jacket tighter against the breeze. Mariah paused, considering the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know this: it only takes one voice to start something. And even if things don't stay perfect, at least people know they can speak up. That's enough for now." Taylor grinned, nudging her friend. "You're a force, you know that?" Mariah laughed softly, her gaze lifting to the brilliant blue sky. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of staying quiet." As they sat together, Mariah felt a deep sense of peace. She had learned that strength wasn't just about standing up once. It was about inspiring others to stand with you. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't standing alone anymore.